Hey, Nine here with another fanfic called Shed No Grace on Me, or What If Naruto Was in Elden Ring? Chapter 1. Shed No Grace on Me. That is a big tree. Kurama's remark was certainly on point, Naruto mused. A mighty oak, great and gilded like so much spun gold. It loomed large across the horizon, easily the biggest thing he'd ever laid eye on, and had seen more than a few giant monstrosities in his day. Yes, right. Big golden tree. Very nice, very impressive, very bright. That much had never been in question. The next bit? Not so. Blue eyes swept left. Blue eyes swept right. He didn't see a single soul in sight. What he did see were rolling green hills dotted with piecemeal ruins, a sprawling landscape as open as it was vast. This was in every way a foreign land to him, a place he'd never been before. Seeing was, as they say, believing, and he didn't believe for a single solitary second that he was anywhere near home. His pulse quickened in his veins as his thoughts began to race. The drums of a great hunt out for blood. Where? In the blue hell. Had they woken up this time? Why do we keep waking up in strange places like this? His breath hitched in his throat, heralding a surge of panic lest he hyperventilate. He bit down on it and stomped it into bloody oblivion. Stop! Don't panic! Arms? Check! He glanced over at his right limb, thankful to find it still in one piece. The bandages were still holding at least, even if the fingers were a little stiff. Legs? He glanced down and heaved a sigh. All right. Not hurt or crippled in any way. Great. Which brought him back to the matter at hand. Here. Where? How? Did I eat some tainted ramen or something? Stop panicking. A low sigh pervaded the back of his mind. You're giving me a headache. Easy for him to say. Everything had been fine. His last memory was of his head hitting the pillow. He'd been safe and warm in his bed, sleeping off that mission. He barely even remembered the details. Something about a scroll and a ring or something. You mean the ring on your finger? Blue eyes snapped to his left hand. On his fourth finger. All the color drained out of his face. It was a simple thing. A little golden band writ with symbols. Runes? He didn't much understand. He tried to tug it free, only for it to cling tight to his finger. Much to his chagrin, the damn thing actually seemed to constrict around his flesh, biting down painfully. What the hell? Why won't it come off? Congratulations. He could hear the smile in his partner's voice. Looks like you got hitched when you weren't looking. To who? He bleated back. Another tug, another failure. Oi, guys! Raising his voice, he called out to the wilds. You got me, all right? You can come out now. Get this thing off me. Silence reigned supreme. This ain't funny. Damn. Look around. Kurama prodded him when he began to flounder. Maybe there's something we can use to get our bearings? There. In the distance. Movement. A giant knight clad in golden armor astride an equally large horse. Who was it? A man? A woman? Distance and armor made it impossible to discern their identity. Something was better than nothing. For lack of any other option, he started down the hill towards them. No need to use the cloak here. The rider cantered back and forth almost lazily, utterly unaware of his presence. Still, he came closer. Only a stone's throw away now. Hey! He shouted, waving a hand. Any chance you know where I— Ah! His words pitched into a yelp as the rider pivoted with frightful grace and brought a golden halberd crashing down into an equally golden palm. Blue eyes blazed red as the ground cratered underfoot. That, he hissed, wasn't very nice. Then he yanked. Clonk! clenched knuckles barreled upright in a rousing uppercut, ripping the halberd from the Golden Knight's grasp and striking them dead on the chin in the same instant. Their mount reared. Rider met ground. Even as it began to rise, Naruto leaped onto its chest. A sandal-clad foot stomped down, eliciting a low groan from his would-be killer as it drove them back into the dirt. Wrestling their shield down, he shoved a kunai up under the warrior's chin, point tickling the pale expanse of an exposed throat. "Let's just calm down and reset our tempers, eh?" he hummed softly. "I'm not your enemy. Don't make me use this." The knight went still beneath him. At length it made a tiny, awkward noise. "Now, I'm going to let you go. Promise not to attack me?" Another faint sound, almost like a sigh. "All right, Tilda." He stepped back, muscles tense, red to flee. The man, was it man or not, rose ponderously, sitting with legs folded beneath them. Their mount loosed an anxious whinny and pawed at the ground with a hoof, but made no move to attack. Seemed it had a brain after all, like its master. "Good girl." He reached a hand up, offering it to the warhorse. "I'm not going to hurt ya." A low snort told him just what the steed thought of that. Still, it nosed his hand. Its emotions were easy enough to read. A simple lowering of his hands and loosening of his stance was all it took to calm the beast. "Great. Now," he turned his attention back to the fallen knight. "Can you point me toward the nearest village? Or better yet, tell me where the hell I am. I'd settle for that." The knight didn't speak. It only waved its hands, pantomiming something he didn't understand. Naruto blinked. Blinked again now, as the knight continued to perform. What in blaze was this? A puppet show or something? Couldn't make heads or tails of it? "Can't you talk?" He couldn't see the face behind that helm, but he could feel the disdain within their gaze. The knight shook their head, slowly. "Ouch!" Naruto winced despite himself. "My bad. You can only grunt, huh?" As he looked on, the knight made another gesture, slowly. More deliberately now, it pointed toward the giant tree, then to him, now toward a castle in the distance. That, at least, he understood. Maybe he'd find someone actually capable of speech that way. Still, "Don't you dare. We have enough on our plate. We don't need to tag along." Oh, a whim. He offered them a hand and helped them to their feet. "Want to be friends?" Rather than offer anything in the way of an answer, the warrior turned away and began to retrieve its fallen weapons. "Oi!" Here at last, the great sentinel paused, hefting their halberd and shield. Naruto tensed anew, ready to flee at the first sign of trouble. He didn't relish the idea of killing anyone, but he wasn't about to stand there and be killed himself. He stood his ground as it stalked back toward him. Only then did he realize how damnably tall it was. It stood tall, looming head and shoulders over him, brimming with unknowable intent. "Wow." He looked up. "You're a big one, ain't ya?" Tense as he was, he couldn't help but jump as that heavy halberd slammed into the soil, buried deep. The shield joined it a moment later, crashing down with such force that he felt his teeth rattle. And he wasn't even the intended target. "Eh? What are you doing?" Bereft of its weapons, the knight paid him no heed whatsoever. Instead, removed its gauntlets, exposing pale hands. As he looked on aghast, the Golden Knight knelt before him and bowed its head low. Kneeling? Was this knight actually kneeling to him? Why? Slowly, almost ponderously, it reached up to its helm and began to undo the straps there. With only a minor grunt, the sentinel removed their helm. An ebony curtain cascaded down their back, spilling down broad shoulders. With reverent grace, they set their helm aside, raised their gaze and looked him in the eye. Naruto's jaw clicked open. "Oh," he managed less than eloquently, "so that's what you look like." Bright green eyes blinked back at him, set within a stern visage and framed by those midnight tresses. Her face bore a jagged scar hooking down from her forehead to well under her right ear, or what remained of it. An old wound by all accounts and healed, albeit poorly. Pink with age, younger than he expected, his tongue betrayed him in spectacular fashion. "So you're a girl, huh? Why didn't you say so?" Her eyes narrowed, thin lips pursed into an angry line. She opened her mouth to retort, but rather than speak, jabbed a finger just shy of it. Kurama hissed in his head. Naruto winced himself when he beheld the mangled bud of flesh there. He'd been right on the money, and yet now he sorely wished he'd been wrong. She didn't have a tongue. Someone had ripped it out. It had been a while since he felt anger. "Who did that to you?" She just stared. Fine. He'd fight that battle later. "You got a name?" A shake of the head. When she made an irritated noise, she stabbed her finger into the dirt and scrawled a rough message. "I no longer have one. I was the tree sentinel. No more, no less." Another pause. She wrote another line beneath it. "I have failed in my duty and disgraced the Erd tree. Slay me." When she made to write again, he caught her wrist. She stabbed a finger at the message. "Nope." His brow furrowed. Tree sentinel. That wouldn't do. Everyone deserved a name, even a mute, wounded wretch like this. His temper stirred again, and he shoved it down. Who would wound someone like this, tear out their tongue, and leave them alive? It just wasn't right. He couldn't imagine living a life without speech. It horrified him. The wound was old and healed, but maybe he could do something about it. Thoughts for later, he supposed. "Lady, I gotta call you something." He flailed for a second, thinking. Tree sentinel. Gave up and mashed the words together as only he could. "I've got it. I'll call you Trish then." He snapped his fingers and stabbed one at her. "How's that sound? Meshed the words together a little. Amazing, right?" The tree sentinel made a baffled noise and shook her head. "Nope!" He smacked his lips. "I deny your denial. That's your name now." She made a waffling movement with her right hand, telling him just what she thought of her new title. A faint smile creased his lips. "Hey, I did the best I could, all right? I'd like to see you come up with one, you cheeky brat." She glanced toward the message she'd left, almost longingly. "Sorry," he hummed. "I'm not going to kill you, not going to let you kill yourself either. Why don't you come with me?" She reared back, eyes wide. A hand touched her chest, her lips parted, mouthing a single word. "Me? You see any other giant knight here?" He batted her shoulder. "Come on, it'll be fun." Well said. A new voice intoned behind them, cutting him short. "I did not expect you to best the sentinel in such a manner. Perhaps you are the one I seek." Where did she come from? I didn't sense her. Naruto pivoted, just in time to watch a young woman appear out of the ether. The sentinel stilled behind him, watching the newcomer intently. "Greetings!" Her manner was smooth as silk. "Traveler from beyond the fog." Manifesting from a swirl of blue light and clad in black of cloak, this fresh stranger hid her face from them, or did, until she reached up and tugged down her hood. By contrast to the stoic warrior he'd only just befriended, here stood a young woman with chestnut hair, fair and fleet of foot. Her left eye was bound shut by a strange black mark, the like of which he didn't understand. As he looked on, she knelt before him, almost gingerly, as if she were afraid of spooking him. A slow, ponderous silence pushed between them. At length, she broke it. I am Melina. Her lone eyes met his. I offer you an accord. Chapter 2. Spirits and Summons. This world was absolutely broken. Naruto realized this fundamental truth just before the first night passed. And what an ugly truth it was. He'd known this wasn't his world. He could accept that much now, albeit begrudgingly. Everyone and everything he'd encountered here, with very few exceptions, tried to kill him on sight. Well, good for them, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. Again, that didn't bother him. What bothered him was death, or the apparent lack thereof in this world. Tonight, they'd taken refuge in the crumbling remains of a church with a rather curious merchant well outside of Stormvale Castle. The man had been more than happy to offer a great many wares at discount and a hint about howling wolves in a place called Mistwood in exchange for tonight's protection. As leader, first watch fell to him, leaving him to tend a lonesome fire while his companions slumbered near a half-demolished wall. His gaze flicked their way, make certain no harm had come to them while he wasn't looking, then swiveled back to the darkness. A mute girl and a woman who could vanish into thin air made for strange bedfellows, he felt. Quite the merry little fellowship we're forming, Kurama remarked. I'll say. He nudged the fire with a stick. What do you think of 'em? The big one's easy to read, but the other… She's more than she seems. You all right? Just a little shaken. He had every right to be, given what he'd witnessed today. They'd stumbled into soldiers on the way here. Not the chatty sort, those. They hadn't been willing to back down, and an attempt to skirt them led to an attack in turn. Trish had beaten them to a pulp. No contest. He'd managed to drive the rest away, but the deed was done. A small shiver shook his shoulders. He'd recovered from that much, even forgiven her for attacking blindly. He couldn't find fault with that. Not so what came after. Said men had been alive and well after they rested at one of these grace sites. Alive and well. They even seemed to recognize them, if only because they weren't quite so eager to engage a second time. For reasons he didn't understand, enemies seemed unable to die here, and if they did, it didn't stick for long. Did that apply to everyone or only certain persons? Did he even want to test it? Broken indeed. A fitting term, given all this talk of shattering and broken rings and whatnot. Melina had proven rather talkative in that manner. This realm, the lands between she called it, was in every way screwed, which begged the question. How to fix it? Did he even want to? Should he? Did he have that right? Of course you do. You're not the sort to let folks suffer. Yeah, I know, but I don't even know where. His senses tingled, warning him. Might I have a word? He pivoted in place. A woman in white robes awaited him, perched upon a rocky outcrop, 4 hands folded in her lap. Blue hands. He tilted his head, trying to get a look beneath the wide-brimmed hat she wore, and succeeded at the last. A lone eye regarded him from a cherubic face, pale as can be. A pleasure to meet thee, Tarnished. Her voice was low, husky even. I am the witch Renna. He knew a lie when he sensed one. That's not your real name, is it? She didn't answer. Oh, come on! He winced a little, sensing her anger. I wasn't trying to make you angry. You're cold, right? There's plenty of space here at the fire. She didn't budge. A blonde brow rose. Really? Her brow furrowed. I do not require warmth. Be that way, would she? Fine. Then he'd come to her. I've heard tell of a warrior hurtling about these lands, making all manner of madness. Her lone eye drilled into him as he picked himself up and wandered her way. And upon looking into the matter, the talk, I surmise, is of thee? Heat crept up the back of his neck. He scratched at it. That'd be me, yeah. As I thought, a thin smile was his reward. Then I must ask, what do you hope to gain from all this? Nothing, really. He turned and stared back into the campfire, heat smoldering in his eyes. I like helping people. As she looked on, he threw a stick into it, sparking the dying embers to new heights. This place seems like it needs a lot of help. His spirit warmed to the words, even as he said them. So that's what I'm going to do. He didn't really know where to start, but he'd be damned if he didn't try. Fool of a boy. Her lips pursed into a thin line. You cannot save everyone. He laughed at her. Actually dared to laugh, as he hadn't in a long time. See, that sounds like a challenge. And I've never backed down from one of those. I ask again, Rani pressed. What dost thou hope to gain? Naruto smiled. He had his answer at last. Happiness. 0.0.0. He'd spoken with the witch last night. Melina knew it was no business of hers. Indeed, anyone else would have been well asleep. She'd only noticed by chance, and in noticing, her anxiety raced to new heights. It galled her. She was no true maiden, not really, but she had her purpose, just as Rani likewise had hers. He need not consort with that one, and yet he had. They'd sat and talked for some time. Her tarnished was a curious sort, it seemed. Such rankled, but she couldn't fault him for it. Perhaps he wasn't her tarnished at all. He didn't act like one in the least. He had no destination in mind. Indeed, he wandered hither and yon without a care in the world. She'd already tried to nudge him in the direction of Stormvale Castle and the great rune within, but he seemed immune to her machinations. He'd laughed when she offered to turn his runes to strength, because, you see, he didn't have any runes. Naruto had not slain a single soul, not since he'd come to this land, not a one. Even now she watched him lay out a soldier with a powerful punch to the head. He stooped to a knee, made certain the poor soul still lived, and kept walking. Baffling. Others parted for him, falling to fists and techniques she'd not seen the like of. None could touch him. None came close. And still he remained in his base state. This man was a warrior, a fighter. He knew his way around the battlefield and fought with frightful speed. His techniques rent armor apart, and his fist shattered weapons like so much kindling. Where he walked, enemies fell in trove. He could have torn his way through them in a tornado of blood, reaped their runes, and left them to rot. Yet he didn't. Why? Why wouldn't he kill? He wasn't afraid to fight, but the injuries he inflicted were of a minor sort. Not so the tree sentinel, or Trish, as he called her. She'd seen her fight. That one was a whirlwind of woe to any who came near her or her mount. The wise fled at the sight of her. The foolhardy had their heads stove in by halberd and shield, but not her tarnished. She deferred to him wordlessly, as was her wont. He must be a soft sort. The realization alarmed her, and not in a good way. Her tarnished wanted to help others, to heal rather than hurt. Wait, her tarnished? She'd only known him for a few days. When had she come think of him as such? Moreover, who did he think he was, sparing his foes? Well, that settled it then. Her tarnished was bloody mad. Melina felt he must be insane, if only because it explained his recent spate of actions. He did not seek out Godric the Grafted, as his kin had before him. No, nay, never. He seemed intent on ranging about the wilds in search of every nook and cranny. Every chest, every bit of material, anything he could get his hands on. When his tall companion balked at such, he simply pointed out that they'd need such things to survive. Melina felt he was just hoarding things. Would he be strong enough to face Godric in all his grisly glory? She could but hope. Twisted though he may be, he was a demigod. He'd been the end of many a tarnished before. "Oi, do you have to do that?" Naruto turned suddenly, looking right at her, right through her hidden spectral form. If you're going to travel with us, you could at least help shoulder some of our burdens. Carry some stuff, you know? Melina bridled. It was a bluff. He couldn't be aware of her presence, nay, surely not. None could find her, or harm her, in her spectral form. Ignore him. Maybe if she remained silent, perfectly still, he'd let her be. I may not be able to see you when you're like that, but I can sense you pretty easily. Naruto planted a fist on his hip, tone almost chiding toward her, as an elder brother might speak unto a younger sibling. Now come down here, stop hiding, and quit wasting everyone's time. Damn him. She appeared with a huff. You need not be rude about it. Ain't trying to be, he drawled. But if you want to help us, you can at least do your part. Rather than relent, Melina steered the subject to safer waters. You would do well not to trust that witch. Nah. That dazzling smile flashed out again, stark as sunbeams. I think I'll be all right. She doesn't seem the dangerous sort, you know? How very little he knew. That one was dangerous. She knew full well, after all. Her name is... Rani, I know. His head bobbed. She told me. Melina balked. How did you... Well, she introduced herself as Rena at first. His lips quirked in a small smile as they walked. But she told me after I badgered her a bit. Ran away soon after that, though. Rani? Running away. How unlike her. No, that wasn't her concern. Not anymore. Melina grit her teeth until she felt her jaw ache. No, she couldn't break their pact. Alas, the deed was done, the deal made, their accord sealed in both word and bond. It could not be undone so easily. He didn't seem to care. Fine. If he didn't care, then she cared not what he thought, not a jot. Witches aside, I suggest you take heed in other matters. And if her words were a tad clipped, she pretended not to notice. Lest you run afoul and find yourself grafted by Godric. You've said that word before. Grafting. His gaze snapped to hers. Tell me more about this grafting thing. A cold certainty settled in Melina's gut. Surely he knew. He must. He couldn't be so ignorant. Do you truly not know? He squinted at her, rather reminding her of a fox. Know what? Perhaps it was remiss of her to manipulate him in such a manner. His expression said he knew full well what she was doing. But his love for life could be a boon here. If he knew the atrocities that thing committed every day, then he might yet hasten to stop him. Or die, a nasty little voice whispered in the back of her head. Nonsense. He wouldn't fall so easily, surely. You truly are a stranger to these lands, aren't you? She tried to keep the scorn from her words, to no avail. He kills dozens of tarnished by the day and adds them to his host, his body. The silence that followed threatened to choke the very life from her lungs. Blue eyes glazed over, cold with anger. Does he now? Melina let him go and vanished back into the ether. Not an hour later, they came upon the shack. 0.0.0. Everyone's been grafted. 3 little words, yet they set Naruto's blood to boiling. Everyone who came with me. The hooded woman at his feet continued to babble, heedless of his mounting rage. They crossed the sea for me. They fought for me. She hugged herself, as though afraid her limbs would come flying off at any moment, only to have their arms taken, and their legs, and their heads. She swallowed once, shivering a little. All of it, taken and stuck to the spider. He hadn't thought to find anyone here, let alone a tale of woe like this. Spider? He croaked out, remembering Melina's warning. Didn't you know? She looked up at him, eyes damp. If you're stuck to the spider, you become a chrysalid. Quite the lark when you think about it. A weak laugh tumbled out of her. You're headed to Stormvale Castle, aren't you? Hope you weren't enticed by that fellow with the strange mask. His brow furrowed. He hadn't met a man in a mask. You've come to be one with the spider, I presume? He could feel the front she was putting up, even through her fear. That makes us two peas in a pod, but I don't have your courage. It's scary, you know. Her voice warbled a little now, tiny, pitiful thing that she was. Having your arms cut off, or your legs, or your head? She lowered her head in shame. I want to be like everyone else, but I'm just too scared. I'm nothing but a craven, you see. He knelt before her and didn't budge. If it's not too much trouble, could you pass on a message for me? If you see the little chrysalids up in the castle? Earnest eyes turned up to meet his once more. Tell them, I love them. And that despite my craven heart, I'm sure I'll be joining them soon enough. I'm finally getting the hang of this pain thing, you know? Kuram absolutely hissed in his head. Naruto felt a strange sensation bloom in his chest. It felt hot. Hate. Was this hate? How long had it been since he experienced it? Not since pain, not this raw, primal level of anger. That settled it. He'd be having a word with this Godric fellow. Several words, loud words, involving fists, and quite possibly a Rasengan or 3. I suggest a Rasen Shuriken. Can you perhaps take this little one along with you? She offered him a box of ashes, tugging him back to reality. The poor thing deserves someone braver than me, I think. There it was again, that shy, tremulous smile, as if she half expected him to break her in half. And the spirits look rather fondly upon you. It'll be glad of your company, I think, the little one. Naruto made up his mind. His hands flew out and seized hers. So you can use summoning jutsu then? That's amazing. 0.0, 0.0. So you can use summoning jutsu then? That's amazing. Of all the words Roderica had hoped to hear, these were not that. Jutsu? What on earth was a jutsu? And his hands were so very terribly warm. Her eyes flitted down to her fingers, clasped between his palms. Treacherous fingers betrayed her and squeezed a little tighter. You really think so? The words babbled out of her in a rush. Then came her shame. I'm afraid you're mistaken, sir. I'm not amazing, no, not at all. None of that! His cry slew her doubts before they could take root. It's tough at first, starting out as a summoner. Believe me, I know. His head bobbed before she could muster the nerve to speak. But you mustn't give up. Those strong arms thrashed hers up and down as he shook her hands. It gets easier after a while. Trust me. She jolted beneath the force of his words. Who was he? He had stumbled upon her by purest chance, and now he seemed hell-bent on lifting her spirits. Heh. Spirits. A poor joke. Even so, the man before her burned so bright in her sixth sense, a sun in all its gleaming glory. Even the Erd tree itself seemed dim by comparison. No, no. Such thoughts were blasphemy. Speaking of which, he had a bloody tree sentinel right there behind him. Couldn't they read minds? She'd heard the stories. And really, what was he doing with a sentinel anyway? That brute had nearly felled more than a few of her friends before Godric's men came. Would that giant knight lop off her head? You should come with us. Roderica's neck nearly suffered whiplash. Me? The word emerged as a tiny squeak. I couldn't possibly. I'd only slow you down, and it's not safe out there. A blonde brow quirked. Ain't much safer here. He was right about that much. A strong breeze could knock these walls down. Look, he raised a thumb to his mouth, just shy of his lips. Let's compromise. If I beat this Godric guy." The tree sentinel made a disbelieving noise behind their helm. "Then would you come with us?" Naruto finished. Could he? This particular tarnished did not lack for confidence, if nothing else. But did he possess the ability? Could a mere mortal ever hope to best a demigod? She'd never laid eye on Godric the Grafted, not herself, but she'd heard tell of him all the same. Legends had it he was terribly strong, even in his waning age. Powerful enough to still be Lord of Stormvale, even after all this time. The roads would certainly be safer. Roderica shook her head a moment later, refusing to dwell on such. "But you can't. He's much too powerful, even for someone like you." "Great!" His smile told her she'd fallen right into his trap. "Till then, I'll leave you with a guard, just in case." Before she could think to stop him, he bit down on his thumb. Blood sprayed forth. Roderica jerked back, hands flailing to protect her face. "What are you doing?" "This!" He grinned, took 3 long strides backward for safety, and slapped his hand against the ground. "Summoning Jutsu!" Smoke sprayed forth as runic script burst forth from his palm. A dark shape emerged from within, looming large over the shack, larger now, largest still. Roderica looked up, squinting against the haze. What was that? An enemy dragon, perhaps? It was so terribly large. A sudden gust of wind swept the smoke away. The tree sentinel made a terrified noise. Roderica stood in agreement. Not a dragon. Nay, not at all. She felt her jaw click open all the same. "That is a very large frog. Toad, actually," Naruto corrected. "They're touchy about that." Why? Bloody blasted thing was bigger than a house. "Yo, Naruto!" The beast bade the blonde greeting, because apparently it could speak. Oh gods, she felt faint. "Long time no see." "Hey, Gamakichi!" Her fellow blonde waved up at the monstrosity. "I need a favor. Would you mind?" Roderica barely heard the enthusiastic exchange that followed between the unlikely two. She retreated inward, withdrawing to a tiny inlet of calm within her mind. Even then, her world swam anew, and she felt faint. Not only did he have a spirit inside him, but he could summon them? How paltry that made her seem. He hadn't even summoned something from the ashes. This was a living, breathing creature, and oh, had she gotten into this mess? Hey! The summoner blinked, drawn back to reality by the tugging of her sleeve. "Just stay put with my buddy here." The blonde man offered her his hand. "I promise he'll protect you. I'll be right back." Bold, this one. Did he even realize what he was saying? Her fingers curled around his ever so gently. "Might I have your name, sir?" 0.0. Nephili knelt before the dead man and paid her respects. "Be proud." She touched a hand to the chest of the sundered knight, shivering at her feet. "You were a fine warrior. Your only mistake was your choice of master." Her hand eased the dented visor shut, obscuring the bloody ruin of the man's face from sight alongside his last gap-ruse. "Rest now. Let the winds lift you to a higher place." The warrior expired beneath her with a rasping gurgle. It almost sounded like a sigh. She straightened with one of her own. Such a pity. Though their lord was rotten and their bodies twisted within, these were fine fighters. It shamed her to slay such, but it was her duty. They could not be suffered to live, not as they mindless monsters they'd become in the wake of the shattering. Now for Godric. She would face him and slay him, or die in the offing. The door slammed open. Nephili jerked back, reaching for an axe, prepared for an attack. She had time enough to take in bright blue eyes, whiskered cheeks dimpled in a scowl, and sunny blonde hair. Then he was upon her, all but flinging himself into the room. "You!" The word burst out of the intruder in a shout that shook her bones. He both looked and sounded fed up beyond measure. "Don't you dare!" Nefili found herself standing at attention despite it. "Me? You gonna attack us like everyone else?" She shook her head slowly. Nay, not on her best day, not when he was covered in that much blood, none of it his own. Had he waded through the castle to get here? And who was that giant of a woman after him? She couldn't even fit through the doorway, such was her height. She had to physically crouch down just to look in after him. Closer inspection revealed golden armor, a familiar halberd, and... Oh shit. Nefili's blood ran cold. Tree sentinel. What was a spirit's damned sentinel doing her? "Tarnished, are you?" She took the initiative for what it was and made curt introductions. "I am Nefili Lu, tarnished and warrior, here by decree of my father." She cast a glance to the knight at her feet. "How utterly repellent this is! This grafting of Godric's ill befits a lord. He's tainted the very winds." He was just staring at her. Did he even hear what she was saying? "If you intend to challenge Godric, I ask that you call upon me to fight by your side." She could only assume he was, with a look like that about him. The winds run cold with his deeds. And so did she, at the thought of facing him alone. "I'm certain Father would permit me to aid you in the coming battle." Did I hear right just now? The man stormed forward, claiming her attention once more. "You after Godric?" Her brain fizzled under his direct gaze. "Yes?" Blue eyes sparked with wild fury. "That sounds grand." Chapter 3. Bear Witness. "So we're all in agreement? Godric needs to pay." "With his life, that is my only demand. On that much, we agree." "Great!" Naruto clapped his hands and leaned back against the ruined corridor wall, regarding the trio before, with a merry smile. "I'm so glad we're finally on the same page," his piece said. He turned and fixed Nefili with a glare. "But not death." "Ah, wait a sec." A hand came up when she scowled and made to speak. "Let me finish. When I say no death, I meant not yet." The barbarian warrior opened her mouth, closed it, considered. "Are you going to torture him?" "No, nay, and never. Not this style." "Nope." He shook his head, denying her. "Death is quick. Final. A release even." His fingers snapped, cutting her short. "Just like that. Your life's snuffed out and you're gone. I've seen death. You kill Gordic, and he'll be away off to the afterlife or whatever passes for that in this world. No justice for all those he's wronged. Is that what you want?" Her piercing gaze met his, and Naruto lifted his chin to meet it. Adorable. If she meant to intimidate him, she had a long way to go. "Cute. We've grappled with a goddess already. She'll need a bit more divinity to make us cower. You intend to take his great rune, then?" Something dawned in her eyes. "To leave him powerless?" "Meh." He waffled a hand before her. "I intend to ask him what the hell he's doing and then kick his sorry hide if I don't like the answer. But sure, that works. No idea what a rune is, though." At length, she backed down. "As you say, warrior. Warrior, not shinobi, nor a tarnished, either." Heat flared in his face. He wasn't sure why. "Stop calling me that," he grumbled, looking away. He's not getting away from his massacres that easily. Trish made a disbelieving noise and folded both arms before her armored bosom. Naruto rounded on her, feeling somewhat bemused. She donned her helmet anew, the silly girl, doubtless to try and hide her face from him once more. Clever but next to useless where he was involved. Even now, he could sense her emotions roiling like a frothing cauldron. "What? You don't think I can do it?" The mute tree sentinel granted him a grave nod. Once, such a lack of confidence would have stung, rankled him in the worst of ways. Now, he simply smiled. Everyone always underestimated him. Some of his greatest foes had thought him little more than a harmless breeze. Until this breeze kicked up an almighty hurricane and thrashed them within an inch of their lives. She'd been no different, and there would likely be many more in this wild, warped world who though the same. Fine. Let them. He'd been doubted before, ages ago, considered the underdog, the worthless, the wretched. If everyone in the lands between would doubt him every step of the way, well, seeing the looks on their faces when he pulled this off, it would be all the sweeter. "I ain't gonna die." Cursing his lack of height, why did she have to be so damn tall? He stepped to her and patted her hip. "Don't worry, I've got this." Trish pivoted away. This time, the sound she made sounded nothing short of petulant. A polite cough echoed behind him. Ahem? Now he came to the third and final member of his merry little band. "So?" He planted both hands in his pockets and squared up. "Got something to say?" Melina reared back a little, alarmed and not liking the look on his face. "Tarnished? Are you angry?" "Nope." Maybe his reply was a bit too quick, because her good eye narrowed upon him. "I'm not. Whatever gave you that idea?" She was watching him like a hawk. Not her fault, he supposed. If his face looked anything like what he felt right now, well, it might be more than a little terrifying. There was no need to be afraid, really. He was hardly looking to lash out and hurt someone. No, just Godric. He'd never met the man, never lay eye on him, but something told him he wouldn't like what he found here today. Really, anyone holding the surname of Grafted wasn't going to be a good person. No matter what he said, what he did, it wouldn't bring back the hundreds of lives lost here, nor could he. For all his strength and skill and speed, Naruto knew he couldn't raise the dead, and that made him angry. In all fairness, Naruto wasn't trying to be scary, truly. He just couldn't recall the last time he'd been this furious. This was a different sort of anger than he was used to, righteous and pure, burning white hot in his chest like the sun itself. He held it close to his heart, that molten core, and kept it warm. He'd seen the horrors of Stormvale Castle, the carnage hanging from the ceiling, the ghastly grafting of the spider, a beast he'd had no choice but to put down. All those people, all those lives, molded together, fused in a ghastly amalgamation that made his guts growl just thinking about. All the while, the band on his ring finger burned as though it too were affronted by the horrors here. Naruto spared it a black look. Blasted thing still wouldn't come off. He was beginning to think it was more than some mere wedding ring, but he had more pressing concerns. The chrysalid's memento was a heavy weight in the sealed pouch set against his thigh, an ugly reminder of Roderica's words. Everyone's been grafted. She might want to see what was left of her men. He would give her that much. He's patted it just to make sure it was there. Initially, his optimism had nagged at his thoughts, arguing against him, wanting to believe there was a reason for such horror. But now, none could argue against this. He'd seen too much. The death, the festering piles of flesh, feasted upon by rabid dogs. No matter what some might say, there was no good reason to rip apart people and hang them from your ceiling. Those he hadn't beaten down or driven off had been slain by Trish and Nephili, like that creepy Castellan. They might come back to life in time, made wiser for the experience. They might not. In truth, he no longer cared for this place. He just wanted to fix it and put the horror of Stormvale behind him. Anyone who delighted in this was wrong. If your lord would do such, your lord is evil. Godric had to go. No two ways about it. Others had tried to stop him before, if Melina was to be believed. They'd failed. Still, a little voice in him argued against what he was about to do. Everyone deserved a chance. No, not this time. That was the anger talking. But he knew he couldn't just let him be. Not even Madara would have sunk this low, but Kaguya had. This reminded him eerily of her deeds with the White Zetsu, only a far, far more horrific scale. Few would have sunk this low, grafting other people together to make these abominations. There was no saving them, any of them. He'd had to put them down, and the knights defending them. "You will triumph, tarnished." Melina's voice tugged him out of the fog. "That is my belief." Naruto quirked a brow, half expecting a lie in her words. He found none. "Huh?" A crooked smile touched his lips. "You actually do." She stood a little bit taller, not preening before his gaze, yet proud nevertheless. Her open eye regarded him intently, and not for the first time he found himself wondering just who she was. For all her claims at playing the part of a maiden, he couldn't help but feel she was more than that. There was a purpose in her, a power held back, leashed by her will alone. For all he knew, Melina might just be the most powerful person here. "'Tis a lord you're about to face." Her next words proved his suspicions. "Do you require my aid in the coming battle?" Kurama offered a low whistle. "Well, aren't you easy to read?" "Not this time." He held up a hand to forestall another argument. "Stand back and let us handle this." Her brow grew stormy. "I am quite capable of defending myself." "I don't doubt that." His voice cut in, a bit sharper than intended as he took her by the shoulders. "But I don't want to see you stuck to that thing." The color drained to her face, her good eye seeking the fog door. "I understand. I shall abstain. Just this once." Naruto let her go, watching only absently as she retreated to her ethereal form. Only then did he exhale. Crisis averted. Tarnished could die over and over, that had been made quite clear to him, but he wasn't keen to throw his companions into the fire. Nephili was probably safe in that regard, but Trish and Melina might well be mortal for all he knew. Trish was probably going to fight whether he wanted her to or not, but she was tall, armored, armed, and had her spectral steed. Against someone known for fusing people to himself? Well, he wanted to spare Melina that, if only for a time. All right, then. That was settled. Now for the matter of their unseen watcher. He'd felt it for the last hour, an unseen presence gazing upon them from afar, stalking them, observing their efforts. It loomed close now, closer than ever before. Why hadn't it attacked? Was it waiting for them to face Godric, the better to stab them in the back? The thought soured his mood even further. Kurama's warning did little to help it. "He's over there. I can sense him." Restraining a grimace, he craned his neck past one of the ramparts, over the fallen corpse of a troll, down the deserted corridor. Blue eyes narrowed. There. The mounting sense of peril loomed large only yards away. He took a stance, preparing himself for the attack he was sure would come. Any moment now. They were exposed here. A proper ambush would do lasting damage. It never came. Instead, he saw, glimpsed, a faint shimmer of dying golden light shuffling around the corner in the opposite direction, as if something or someone were disappearing, returning from whence they came. A trick of the light, perhaps? An overactive imagination? Unbidden, he found himself stepping forward, out of the corridor and into the night. "Hey!" he raised his voice. "Stop stalking us and attack already!" "Nay," A low, throaty voice called out, "An omen incarnate. I am not so craven as to strike when your back is turned." The air quivered before his words. For a moment, just a sliver of a second, he beheld someone else fading into the ether. Someone large indeed, larger than Trish, even. A horned head turned to regard him now, exposing weathered grey skin, a looming body bound in a ruined cloak. And yet for all that, he moved with deceptive grace. Leaning upon a worn, gnarled staff, they pivoted, facing him fully. "Come," the invader beckoned. "I would speak with you." "Bugger?" Nephili swore under her breath. "Is that who I think it is?" Naruto heard Trish absolutely hiss behind him. She tried to drag him back toward the door. Naruto didn't budge. He stood his ground in turn, refusing to move. His senses took the horned man in an instant, struggling to untangle the complicated knot of emotions that bound up his being. Duty, resolve, resignation. Tired. So very tired and full of bitterness. He wasn't sure if this was an enemy. Instinct said yes, but his heart said no. He dared a step forward. Still the stranger made no move to approach nor retreat. "What is thy business with Godric?" That ominous staff tapped once against the ground, an eerie bell tolling for them. "Choose thine words carefully." "You already know, don't you?" Naruto stalked up to him, forcing a swearing Nephili to follow or be left behind, and Trish in her wake. "You've been hounding us since we set foot in this castle." He stopped a stone's throw away, well within reach of that cane, then crossed both arms before his chest. "A name would be nice." "Margit will suffice." The man loomed large over him now, casting him in his shadow. Another tap of the staff. "I need not yours, tarnished." He gave it anyway. "Naruto, ain't much, I know." Trish whined and dragged at Naruto's arm again. The horned man's gaze snapped to her, taking in her armor at once. "You tamed a tree sentinel?" His bushy brow rose, considering her as one might a cracked gem. "Curious. Is she perhaps—" "No." He made up his mind a moment later. "Disgraced, then? Fallen from grace. Your betrayal sullies your order." Trish wilted. "Oi, she's not a failure, you—" "And here I see the daughter of Luke's." His all-seeing gaze swept over Nephili next, causing the dusky-skinned woman to bridle in turn. Pitiable. That grey face twisted in a sneer. "A motley band, if ever I have seen one." His gaze swept over Melina's spectral form, lingered there to let her know he saw her, then moved on. "Your answer, tarnished. I would hear it said from your own mouth. Do you not seek his great rune?" Anger sparked. Naruto felt himself convulse in a full-body shudder. This again? It was too much. The whiskered warrior flung up his arms with a cry bordering on explosive. "Runes, runes, runes! What is it with you people and runes, eh? I don't even know what a rune is. Yet they're all everyone and anyone wants to talk about here. Listen." Stepping forth, he stabbed a finger against Margit's chest. "I'm here to stop him from hurting anyone else. That's all." "Truly? And what about you?" Another jab, heedless of the absolute behemoth before him. "Are you working with him too?" A third stab upwards now, seeking the heart beneath his bony ribs. "Well? Answer me. What do you have to say for yourself, huh?" Margit did not gape. His jaw did not click open, and he certainly didn't balk like some flustered fool. He was too refined for that. But he did blink. 3 seconds passed. 3 full seconds in which no one moved or even dared to breathe. Bitter laughter filled the air. Naruto jerked back, startled by it. Margit wasn't laughing at him. It sounded like he was laughing at himself. Not even a full-blown cackle, merely more than a chortle. Those broad shoulders nevertheless shivered with caustic mirth. Leaning upon his cane, he bent his head low, rumbling deeply. "Thou art a curious sort." One hand shifted behind his back. "More's the pity, I suppose." That same hand blurred, slamming a massive spectral hammer down at Naruto's head with impossible speed. A single backstep defeated what would have been a death blow. It crashed down at his feet, sending Trish and Nephili flying, even as he stood firm. A sandal-clad foot stomped down on the golden edifice and shattered it in a shower of light, leaving the omen, grasping naught but empty air. Tan fingers snaked out, snatching at his wrist, reeling him in with ease. Foreheads collided with an awful crunch. Blood spattered, horns flew through the air. "Well!" Margit clutched at his face and stumbled away, sounding mildly impressed for the first time since he'd met the man. "Thou art of passing skill. Warrior blood must truly run in thy veins, tarnished. Are you done?" Golden Sage eyes blazed up at him, heedless of the blood sluicing down his own visage. "Because you will be if you try something like that again." Margit flicked his cane forward. Less than an inch from Naruto's face, the cane came, close enough to catch the cursed scent coming from within. He slapped it aside in a parry and lashed out in a critical hit. Clenched knuckles found a new home within Margit's gut, folding the larger man over him with a dull wheeze. He was still there, gasping for air, when those furled fingers opened to reveal a Rasengan. Margit tried to draw back. Too little, too late. Wild blue light keened in the air, rising in a roar of defiance, both borne by jutsu and man alike. And then he was away. Naruto didn't see the moment the jutsu launched him, but he heard it all the same. It left the towering demigod sprawled on his back, one hand reaching out in vain. Pity stirred in his heart. He'd warned him. He really had. Why did no one listen to him in this blasted world? How many times did he have to prove himself? Even now he'd beaten a man just because he wouldn't back down. Even if he sensed that said man had held back the lion's share of his strength. "Your heart ain't in this, huh?" Margit struggled to rise once more, and failed. "Blast you!" His duty done, the man slumped. His body began to dissolve into motes of golden light, though his voice yet remained. "I shall remember thee, tarnished, smouldering with thy meagre flame, cower in fear of the night. The hands of the fell omen shall brook thee no quarter." And then they were gone, vanished once more. "Wait! I ain't done with you!" Naruto lunged after them, intending to pursue, but Trish held him back. He looked up to find her shaking her head. "Leave the coward!" Nephili hefted an axe, eyes burning. "It's time. Godric awaits." She was right. Enough stalling. Time to face the music. Naruto cracked his knuckles. Showtime. 0.0. 0.0. Morgott was no fool. One did not live to be the last of kings by being foolish after all. Even far from the capital, he saw much of what transpired in the lands between, just as he'd seen the look in this one, the gleam in his eye, the steel in his soul. And so he'd chosen to investigate. Under the guise of Margit, he'd sent a projection of himself to test this tarnished, only to learn that this was no mere tarnished. He'd felt it during their clash. This was something else, more. Still, he'd had to be sure. He'd learned much during their encounter, and yet more questions remained. What was that thing bound to his finger? That ring on his hand was undoubtedly a rune. He recognized the sense of one, although he knew not whose. One of hers, perhaps? Marika might craft such, or perhaps another. It might even be hers. What the devil was she thinking? Could this one be? No. The thorns of the Erd tree would brook no passage, even for this one. Nothing had changed. Nothing would change. To believe otherwise, to hope, was foolish. He sensed him even now. He was aware of him, a coiled spring, ready to leap if he appeared again. It would be a simple matter to unleash his true strength and strike him down, surely. But why should he exert himself overmuch now? For that fop? The death of Godric would trouble him not. Indeed, the realm would be better off without that madman. Next time. He'd try harder next time. On a whim, Morgott made his decision. Just this once. Just this once he let them by. There would be no second time. Miracles only occurred once. 0.0.0. Naruto was going to die. Trish knew it, no two ways about it. If she let him fight alone like that again, he would undoubtedly lose his life. Because this was a bad place. She'd lost her tongue in a castle not unlike this own. Hadn't she? The memory was foggy. She could not slay herself, for honor prevented it. But still, she did not wish to see this twig of a boy throw his life away. If it came to that, she would take the blow for him. It was the least she could do. He, who had bested Morgott masquerading as weak Margit, might just be the one to sit the throne. If only he could get past Godric. To that end, she would gladly sacrifice all. Naruto was kind to her, even with her maimed face, her silent voice, and ghastly disfigurements. He had stood for her, even when the fell omen disparaged all her failures. She had pledged herself to him. But would that oath end in death? Time would tell. 0.0.0. Weak, they called him. Useless, runt of the litter, Godric the coward, Godric the grafted. Ah, how those words burned, how they rankled and seethed and stung. His very spirit shrieked. It wasn't fair, none of it, not at all, not one bit of it. This rotten world had conspired against him from the moment of his birth, even before the shattering. Born sickly, weaker than all those who shared his blood, forced to hide, grovel, scrape and scrounge just to survive, all while his kindred looked down on him. And for what? His earliest memories were of their laughter, cringing aside. You? Strong? Impossible? He'd wanted to be just like them. Was that so wrong? Little Godric, they'd called him. They'd turned up their noses, sneering at him. Only a few had shown him even the tiniest scraps of kindness, the merest morsels thrown to him as one might feed a dog scraps from their table. Those few were gone now. Mild Miquella, gentle Godwyn, and rebellious Ranni. Dear, dear Godwyn and Ranni, felled by the night of black knives. Miquella gone, vanished to parts unknown. And still the laughter continued, the mocking, the jeering. Fools and fops, the lot of them, unable to understand his greatness. No one understood. Millennia had made that clear, among other things, when she'd brought him low that fateful day. Why, just think of it made him tremble with rage. Well, no more. Things were about to change. All the grafting he had ever done had led him here to this moment. Small things at first, enough to give him an edge, then a troll's body to make himself stronger. More arms, more weapons, more strength. Now, here at last, he had it. This would be his magnum opus. Soon they would see. They would all see. He would have his revenge upon them all. This was but the first step. Mighty dragon, thou'rt a true-born heir. Humming to himself, he reached out and touched a six-fingered hand to the manged beast before him, 6 fingers tracing its mangled snout. He could only imagine what manner of power lay beneath. Lend me thy strength, O kindred, he crooned, stroking its mantle. Deliver me unto greater heights. With this he would have power yet greater than before. First one dragon, yes, then more. More. Once he was secure in his power, he would seek out his kin and even graft there to himself. Melania, he would save that rotten bitch for last. He was the lord of all that was golden. And one day he would return to the capital, cast down that fool Morgott, and take his rightful place as Elden Lord. He just needed more time, more strength. The fog doors stirred behind him. He heard at first a faint rippling noise as the barrier he'd erected was breached. Indignant, he turned, cloak rippling from his back. Who dared disturb his solitude? Who had the gall? Soon enough he saw. A young man clad in tattered orange and black rags stalked down the steps, taking them two at a time. His hair shone in the moonlight, blue eyes burned, whiskered cheeks dimpling now in a scowl. Bah! Any anxiety he might have felt withered away in the face of such a lowly wretch, another fool come to take what was his. There could only be one fate for such. Well now, a lowly tarnished. He scoffed and gripped the haft of his axe, blood warming to battle as the host of arms bridled upon his back. Playing as a lord, are we? He paused as the fog rippled anew behind him. Not just one tarnished, another, some fool of a woman wielding T-axes, and behind them, looming over the rest, goodness, a tree sentinel? Here? Excellent, and without one of those bothersome steeds. She, at least, would make for grand grafting material. Today must be his lucky day. He salivated at the thought. With their might added to his own, his grand design would advance further yet, perhaps even enough to seek out that oaf Radan. The blond man gagged suddenly and stepped backward, face gone pale as he beheld his glory. How many lives did you graft to yourself? As many as needed, Godric preened, reveling in his fear. And many more to come. I command thee, kneel. His axe he slammed down, brandishing the leonine crest upon it for all to see with a merry cackle. I am the lord of all that is golden, and you are... Ground. Wait. Ground. Why ground now? Dazed, blinking, Godric's thoughts came back to him. Why was he lying down? Distantly, he registered an awful ache in his jaw and drool training from his chin. Realization dawned, and he found his face made level with the dirt in a way no self-respecting lord desired. Had someone dared to strike him? Him, Godric the Golden? The gall of it all. His rage blazed, hotter than a dragon's flame. Change of plans. Dizzily, he heard the man's voice. He's mine. This was madness. Yes, this was a trick. Some sinister spell. Get up. He turned his prone form to see that filthy blonde tarnished stalking his way. I said, up! His words were a growl, righteous fury made manifest. Take your lumps like a man. Godric tried to rise, only for another impossibly fast blow to catch his chin in the interim. Stars, entire galaxies, flashed before his eyes as he reeled. He was still reeling, in fact, when another blow dented his forehead to send him sprawling. Gravity betrayed him like everything else in this world. His body struck the ground and bounced once, skidding a deep furrow into the ground. What sorcery was this? He hadn't seen either attack, and yet here he was, a demigod, bleeding, by a mere tarnished. Up. He had to get up. Blood fountained forth from his split lip as he stumbled to a knee. I am the lord of... Lord? Through blurry eyes he beheld the blonde, stalking forward, eyes glowing gold. You? He shook his head, blonde bangs swaying from side to side. A lord's kinda like a hokage when you think about it. He stands up for his people. Speaks for them, you know? Cease your prattling! Godric whirled down at him, axes blurring, seeking his head. Begone from my sight. He gives them a shoulder to lean on when they're tired. A hand slapped it away, snapping his arm out of position, and another to cry on when they weep. A second parry knocked him clear onto his back, and a foot came hammering down after it, forcing him to tumble away lest his face be crushed. Rather than pursue, the blonde waited for him to rise. Only then did he continue. He bears their burdens with them, laughs with them, shares in both their joy and their sorrow, their pain, all of it. What do you know about any of that? His words stirred old memories, foul memories. It is the duty of the weak to yield to the strong. He closed on him, wind wailing around him, the storm itself answering his call. His weapons closed on empty air. "You're wrong." Aghast, and knowing full well what he would find, Godric nevertheless couldn't quell his instincts. He whirled up, alarmed to find the blonde perched atop his golden uplifted axe like some kind of fell carrion bird, glaring down at him. He doesn't hurt them! Those ice-blue orbs burned into him, judged him, found him wanting, and damned him all in the same instant. He does not take advantage of them. He certainly doesn't take and take and take until they have nothing left to give. His heel whipped out, cracking him across the jaw. Teeth whistled free. Godric greeted the ground again, caught himself, and tumbled to his feet. "You missed your chance to take my head, fool. A miracle can only occur once." Frothing, he slashed out at him. "You shan't catch me by surprise again." "Then what do you call the second time?" An open palm touched Godric's back. Something slammed into his spine. Wind keened. He pitched forward, bearing an awful hole in his torso. But his body remained strong. It would not fall to a wound such as this. He clambered upright, eyes stinging, teeth aching. Ears ringing, he crawled forward. The dragon's corpse. An awful idea dawned in his heart. If he could just get to it. If you, a so-called lord, would do such things, then that makes you evil. A hand closed around the back of his head, grabbing a fistful of scraggly grey hair to hiss in his ear. "I'll give you one chance. Tell me you had a good reason for this." He was begging with him, pleading almost. "Tell me you didn't kill all these people to satisfy your own lust for power." A groan. "Everything I have done—" "Yes?" The blonde leaned in. "I'm listening." "It's for my own sake." Godric grit his teeth and bucked, tearing a portion of his scalp to get away. The oaf let him go, more fool he. "I will stand above them all. I will strive. I will triumph." All right. Those eyes, those damn eyes, they scoured his very soul, just like Melania had. "Then you are no lord." Red fell over his vision. "You dare?" "That's right!" The invader spread his arms out at either side, and the storm itself seemed to hearken to him. "You heard me! You're no lord, you big bastard!" His voice boomed out with a thunderous cry, crackling alongside a bolt of lightning from on high. "Look what you've done! All these people, all those lives! It ends here, now, today!" "Never!" A faint click of the tongue was his only warning. The blonde slid through his legs and slashed upward with a knife, rending his thigh and something else. Pain. Howling his rage, Godric brought an axe down, but his target was already away, skipping away in the face of his fury. One leap, no more. Then he was upon him. Godric learned another ugly truth then. He couldn't hit him. Left and right, his prey swayed, rooted to the same spot, evading his axes with ease, until the counterattack finally came. One punch weakened him, another brought him to a knee, a third sprawled him out, forcing him to flail in a frenzy just to buy breathing room. This could not be. It must not be. A moment. He only needed a moment. Now, when the blonde braggart hopped away to avoid a slam. Godric was ready. In a fit, hacked down on his arm, severing it with a scream. The moment of horror it caused his adversary gave him all the time he needed, and yet more. Cackling, he rounded on the dragon's corpse. Here, at last, his moment of crowning glory. Ah, truest of dragons. He slammed his mangled arm into the beast's throat, thrusting it deep. Lend me thy strength. The blonde squawked at him. The hell are you doing? Godric only laughed all the louder. Fool. He could have finished him then, while he was vulnerable. Instead, he recoiled as he ripped the beast free and bound its severed head to his will. Such strength. Within moments it was his puppet to do with as he pleased. Now the boy would burn. All of them. Burn. Them, then the world. Forefathers, one and all! He thrust his new toy high, forcing it to belch napalm into the air. Bear witness! Movement flickered in his lower peripherals. A sneer twisted across his face. One of those wretched women, no doubt. Fearing for their friend, they struck at his flank while he was occupied. He barely felt the bite of an axe as it sank deep into his thigh. Her end was nigh. Godric rounded on her and brought his impromptu flamethrower to bear. For a singular wonderful moment, he watched fear dawn in the eyes of Nephili Lu. Unfit to graft, this one. She would burn, but it was not to be. The blonde one barged in from the right and shouldered her aside at the last instant. He saved her at the cost of himself, vanishing into the roaring inferno, swallowed without a sound. Godric crowed in triumph. At last! Victory! His emotions led to his death. A throaty cackle fled from his lips in a rush of dark glee as he heard the fool's companions cry out, "Burn! All of them would burn!" First him, then those fool maidens, then everyone. This would be the birthplace of his dynasty. His reign began now. Enough! Naruto emerged through the fire and flames unharmed, burning brighter than the Erd tree itself. Clad in a cloak of black and gold, did he stride forth, uncaring as the heat kissed his skin. Blue eyes gazed up at him, red as blood. Steam boiled from his shoulders before his unhurried advance, a stately, leisurely walk while the inferno roiled over him, a pace that brought him well abreast of his new weapon. Godric could have retreated, could have pulled back, tried a new tactic, something, anything, and yet the look in those eyes rooted him where he stood. He saw something in them, something terribly, horribly familiar, an expression he'd never seen himself, yet heard tell of many a time in tales, spoke hence. Here at last the Lord's heart quailed in the face of that fearsome glare. They looked nothing alike, and yet he saw him all the same. Great Godfrey? Without so much as a word, golden hands closed around the dragon's jaw, tearing it, and the head, clean off at the base. Still grasping the dragon's severed visage, Naruto reared back with a snarl. So too did his impromptu flail, arcing over and up with savage intent. Godric had time enough to blink as its shadow fell over him. "Oh," he managed. And then, pain. Naruto's arms blurred, and the dragon's head, heavy as it was, could not defy his momentum. It crashed down, slamming him into the floor. Dazed, Godric couldn't even think to rise. By the time he did, another slam hit, stunning him. Bones cracked, followed by a fourth. The strength bled from his body. A fifth now. Miraculously, his mind kept track of them all, even as he was beaten to a pulp. 6. Now he could feel himself slipping, and still the beating continued as his mind slipped further and further away. All the while, his foe howled at him. "This, bam, is not, wham, acceptable, thruck." The ninth blow did Godric in. His world spiraled down into darkness. I hope you enjoyed this fanfic. I plan to try and upload more often. Hope you have a great day, and don't forget to like and subscribe.